welcoming our panel's moderator and expert, if there ever was one, the executive director of the Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders, Lee Swislow. And Lee is joined by founder and president of Freedom to Marry, they oft referred to him as the godfather of gay marriage, Evan Wolfson, and one of the nation's top progressive pollsters and a founding partner of Goodwin Simon Strategic Research, Amy Simon, and a key player in getting the Prop 8 question in front of the Supreme Court in the first place, the president of the Human Rights Campaign, Chad Griffin. Thank you.
I just have to say, these are incredibly comfortable chairs.
Wow.
I know.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
We
Where's
may
my
be
cushion?
bouncing around and having a good time here.
Yes.
So, yes, this is completely a moment for marriage. And as the video showed, there is so much to be celebrating and so much that has happened. So we're going to be talking over this next hour about both how we got here and where we go from here. So, in the last 10 years, and yes, in November of this year, it will be 10 years since the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court issued their landmark marriage ruling, which means, by the way, that this summer, many of us from Massachusetts will be celebrating our 9th wedding anniversary, which, although traditionally is the pottery anniversary, in modern times, it's actually now the leather anniversary. Think about it. Okay. So, in the last 10 years, we have had incredible successes, and we've had, heartbreaking losses that, at least for me, at times were overwhelming. And I think back to 2006, where, in short order, we lost court cases in New York, New Jersey, and Washington State, and 2008, losing in California, 2009, losing in Maine. And yet, we have been unrelenting in our work to move forward. And much of that, is the donors who have stepped up again and again so generously to support this work, and the activists who have never stopped and who have just been tireless. And so today, we're living in a world in which 9 states and the District of Columbia have marriage equality, in which we've shown that we can win referenda campaigns, where this year, through legislative action, we may win marriage in Rhode Island, Delaware, Illinois, Minnesota, where Oregon next year is looking to become the first state to overturn a state constitutional amendment, and where, yes, in June, there's a real chance that the Supreme Court will rule that DOMA is unconstitutional. So, a lot going on, and to start the conversation, I'm going to turn to Evan, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how did we get here?
Yeah, well, thank you, Lee, and thanks to all of you who've been so part of this and supported the extraordinary momentum we all feel and have and are going to continue. So how did we get here? There are several elements. We could talk for, obviously, a very long time about it, but let me just rattle off a few. I think number one, and something we may take for granted, is we have the truth on our side. We have the power of who we are. We have our nation's deepest values. We have the extraordinarily resonant language and meaning of marriage. And all of those things have given us the power that we have built and wielded and engaged and succeeded in propagating in ways that the earlier panels discussed. Secondly, we've always had the right strategy. It doesn't always feel like this in our movement. It doesn't always feel like this in the media coverage, but these things didn't just come out of nowhere, and we're not all just randomly doing things. There is a strategy that derives from the lessons of history and from how the law of marriage operates in the United States that has guided our vision of how we're going to get there, where we're going, and what we need to do to get there. And though there sometimes have been stumbles and detours and defeats, there is a strategy that has brought us to this moment, and there is the strategy that is going to bring us to the victory, whether in June or in the next round. The Supreme Court got interracial marriage wrong before it got it right. We know what we're doing. We know we need to keep doing it. We know it's brought us to this moment, and we know it's going to get us to where we need to go, hopefully sooner rather than later. In order to make that strategy succeed, we've had investment. We've had investment in sustained and increasingly to scale work that includes public education actually engaging the public in this language of marriage, with the data, with our stories, with the conversations about who we are. And we've organized and built infrastructure and engaged politically in tandem with that public education, the air cover of conversation and the ground game of conversations, engagement, organizing, and political work. We've delivered that message repeatedly at the national level and in the individual level through research and through thinking through how to most effectively make the case, what themes to best drumbeat, and who are the best messengers in particular circumstances, and where are we falling short in bringing this message to the right people with the right degree over the right time and in the right framing, and how do we make that work? And we're going to hear more about some of that research. And we've delivered it in this sustained and steady drumbeat. We've learned from our mistakes. We've been good as a movement, though it doesn't always feel this way, in picking ourselves up from stumbles and thinking about where are the gaps, what can we do better, what was missing, what do we need to do. And we have built, for example, political work to accompany the more classic C3 movement organization type work. And thanks, of course, to Tim Gill's leadership and many in this room who in other rooms related to this room made sure that we had the full armament our movement needed across the spectrum of methodologies that in tandem get us to where we need to go. We've broadened the conversation and broadened the messengers. The work we've done and that many in this room and others not in this room have led to bring in surprising voices, new voices, right-of-center voices, business voices, conservative voices, has really made a huge difference. And we need to continue to amplify and diversify that engagement, which we've all seen the fruits of, particularly over the last couple years. We built central capacity. We didn't continue, as had been the pattern in the beginning, having every battle be its own battle, having Groundhog Day where each state was on its own, each campaign was on its own. We built central capacity to guide and support the frontline work in particular battles. We built a campaign model to keep our eyes on the prize and figure out how we needed to get there. And I'd say the other factors that led to us getting there is that we understood and had the tenacity and perseverance to weather the bad stuff and stick with the good stuff, knowing a very important lesson, which is that wins trump losses. Losses are painful, but if you keep at it, if you pick yourself up, if you engage, if you reach out, if you trust that people will move, they do move. And thus we've seen, particularly in the last several years, strategic wins that catalyzed others, whether it was the winning in New York, the winning in New Hampshire, where we won a majority of Republican votes to uphold the freedom to marry and defend it, whether it was securing the president's full-throated and open-hearted support that led to dynamics that rippled throughout the country, and we've all seen and celebrated them even this morning. That single achievement helped open up so much that led to the catalytic wins again of the ballot measures and the successes we saw last year. And that cumulative power of engagement and tenacity, knowing that wins trump losses and knowing that we cannot stop and trust that it will take care of itself, is how we have gotten here, and it's what's going to get us to where we need to go, and then be able to build on that for the rest of the dreams we all have.
Evan. So Amy, Evan talked about the research and the communication, and you've been a part of so much of what's happened. So can you talk a little bit about the messages that seem to be effective, and how did we get to the place of knowing that these would be the effective messages?
Thank you, Lee. So how did we develop winning messages? There's a couple themes. There's so little time and so much to say, but I'm going to try to speak a little thematically. So one thing is just innovation. So 2008, 2009 really showed us that our messages were not working. We didn't have the right way of thinking about it. But we also saw that traditional research methodologies, traditional polling, traditional focus groups were actually inadequate tools to develop the understanding that we needed. And we had to step back and take a really fresh approach to the kinds of research we did, how we did it, and also to understanding where people were. We had to check our own assumptions and take our own accepted premises and put them aside and say that everything was up to be tested again. Another thing that was really key, I think, was collaboration, not coordination. So this innovative research work that we then started to undertake in 2009 It was conducted by different researchers across the nation. There were a lot of different smart, hardworking people really thinking this through, working on their own, funded by a variety of different organizations. And I'm sitting here, but there were lots of folks who were doing this work. What was unprecedented and really important, I think, as a lesson moving forward, as donors, as funders, is that we tore down the researcher silos. Usually organizations hold their research close and they don't share it with anybody else, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But what happened this time is one researcher did something and we shared it with the other researchers, and we said, here's what we learned that worked, here's what didn't work, and here's the new research questions that came out of the work that we couldn't answer in this round. And then the next researcher could take that and move it forward and report back. And that is messy and hard, and there's competition. There's a lot of reasons why that's hard work to do and not natural. But the funders required it, and morals required it. It was the right thing to do. But the right thing doesn't always make it happen. Anyway, it did, and it was important. That level of sharing was dramatic. And frankly, it's the reason we were able to move things forward as fast as we did, relatively speaking, in terms of our understanding. So the next thing, I'm a research geek, and so what is particularly exciting for me is neuroaffective research, which you can also call brain porn. And if you want to know some brain porn books, I'm happy to tell you afterwards. There's a lot of really great work out there. But we just know so much more than we used to about how human emotion, reasoning, and the brain interact to create the attitudes that people then express. And what we learned is that people make instinctive moral judgments first, emotionally, instinctively, and then they develop moral reasoning to back up the judgment they've just made. And for us to actually be able to change the reaction they're having, we have to understand the psychological dynamics, the emotional things, the deep things that are happening inside them, often unconsciously, the implicit bias, the stereotypes that they're holding, that they're using to make these judgments. And then we have to provide them with new emotional cues to put them in the better emotional place, and then give them new moral reasoning to back it up. Because if you get them to a new emotional place but don't give them new moral reasoning, then they revert back to their old emotional state. Does that make sense? I know that's very, okay, cool. I see heads nodding, thank you. So it was really important. We really took this deeper understanding that we now have and put it to work in this space. So what did we find out? We found out that people that we needed to speak to are conflicted voters, and we don't call them persuadable or movable or swing or any of those things, because they're actually in conflict with themselves. They know and they care about gay and lesbian people in their lives. And in the one-on-one relationship, they have a positive emotional connection and reaction. But they also hold all of these unconscious negative stereotypes about gay people in their mind. And as at the class level, at the group level, they have a negative emotional reaction. So they can have a close relationship, but see an ad about rights for the group of gay people and react very negatively because they're not accessing the right emotional space. So we needed to provide right emotional cues that put them in the space of those gay and lesbian people that they knew about personally through a more distanced medium like television. So the conflict that people feel is rooted in knowing and caring about gay people, wanting to be a good person, seeing themselves as being fair-minded and open-minded, aspiring to be their better self, but also having this internal discomfort still around gay people. And I'm saying gay intentionally, by the way, because the marriage research really was not about transgender or bisexual. It was really just the G and L. And so they also feel in conflict around their tradition, religion. For a lot of people, just their religious roots, even if they are not currently churchgoers, it's still a voice inside them that they're hearing as condemning or concerning. And so they're torn. And that conflict is not bad for us, it's an opportunity. It's a way in, it's a way for us to access them. We also know a lot about narrative storytelling now, and that narrative storytelling, not just anecdotes, but genuine storytelling, gets us into the right emotional space of the brain where people can connect and not have their skeptical higher order thinking that we have to kind of struggle with. So it's about emotional cues. So we learned that we really need to have empathically attuned ads that connect with people where they are, that we have to have traditional religious unexpected messengers to give it more power, and also to reassure people at a deeper level that we're not trying to upend society or blow everything up in the way that they're concerned about. So that's really important. We needed to model a journey for them through the conflict. So here's other people like you who feel the same way you do, and here's how they went through this emotionally and came out to be supportive. It was also really important that we not require people to go farther than they could go in order to vote with us. So when you watch, I'm a pollster, I'm not going to show you PowerPoints, I get to show you ads instead, because I also do message development, although I didn't create these ads, I was a core part of the messaging behind them. But what's exciting and interesting about them as you watch them is this intersection of tradition, values. One of the things we know about the negative stereotypes that people hold in their mind is that they see gay people as atomized, as rejected by their birth families, unable to create new families because they think of family as being biological, male-female. That makes them feel like they're free-floating and undermining society. Instead of being a pillar of society by being a building block or a family, they're free-floating and potentially destructive. So when we root gay people in their families and their workplaces and in the emotional space that's positive, where people have these positive feelings about them, it's like an entirely different reaction. We can replace that negative stereotype meme that's happening in their head with a positive emotional space. So having said that, I'm going to I'm going to show these ads. I'm just going to let them run. I just want you to think hard about, nobody ever asked people to approve of gay marriage. They only asked them to allow it. And that was a place that we could get a lot of folks to. And every state had a different path to victory to getting to their 50%. It was not the same formula or message or path. It was built on the same understanding about how to get there. So having said that, let's show these great ads.
My husband and I have been married 32 years.
42.
40.
We weren't always so gay-friendly. We didn't even grow up in an era where it was discussed.
We had just found out our daughter was gay. There was a lot of emotions. We went to see a priest, and I will never forget the answer that he told me. She is the same person that you loved yesterday.
We love our daughter.
I would be very happy if my oldest daughter could get married at home.
As a pastor, my support for Question 6 is rooted in my belief that the government should treat everyone equally. I would not want someone denying my rights based upon their religious views. Therefore, I should not deny others based upon mine. It's about fairness. This law does not force any church to perform a same-sex marriage if it's against their beliefs. And that's what this is about, protecting religious freedom and protecting all Marylanders equally under the law. Join me in voting for Question 6.
Thank you, Amy, and God, I love watching those ads. So now I'm going to turn to you, Chad, and I don't know about you guys, but to me, it feels like in the last few months, it's kind of been all marriage all the time in both the old and the new media. And we know that that didn't happen just by accident. So Chad, can you talk a little bit about the work that the Respect for Marriage Joint Project, which is a project that's led by HRC, Freedom to Marry, AFER, the ACLU, and Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders, has been doing around sort of the Supreme Court opportunity, and why it's been the right strategy, and where we go from here to build on it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lee. I also just once again want to acknowledge in a way, I don't sing or dance. But that tribute that Kate gave to Evan, you know, some of you may have seen in 1983. Think about what we were all doing in 1983. I didn't even know what gay was in 1983. Evan was writing about the importance of marriage equality and what that means for our movement. And in many ways, all that you've seen and all of the success is built upon a vision that Evan laid forth and that many of you funded over these years. So it's important to acknowledge that. Thank you. You know, 4 years ago, after Proposition 8 passed, this crazy idea came about to file a lawsuit, to file a federal lawsuit, to claim via the United States Constitution something that every American citizen should have access to, and to challenge Proposition 8. But there were two pieces of that were important. One was to execute that case in the courtroom with as close to perfection as possible. And as you know, we brought together Ted Olson from the right and David Boies from the left, who had headed off in Bush v. Gore to come together on the issue of marriage. But the second and really important opportunity that was presented was the ability to have a grand public awareness campaign as that case rose, to really lift the partisan veil from which we've always discussed these issues and to finally shine the spotlight on the human face in a way that we'd really never had before because of the media's attention and the media focus. So now fast forward, after that great election with all of the successes that have been talked about this morning, when the Supreme Court granted cert in two important cases, Windsor, the DOMA case, and Perry, the Prop 8 case, many of us saw this as a great opportunity for coordination and for collaboration, something that we progressives, as many of you know, are always not great at. But it really was an opportunity to seize the moment, if you will. And so the day or a couple of days after that, I reached out to our colleagues at the ACLU, who it was their case, the Windsor case, that had been granted, as well as GLAAD and Evan, and obviously the American Foundation for Equal Rights, who were responsible for the AFER case. And we all came together and spent several hours talking about, over the course of a couple of weeks, how could we coordinate? How could we seize upon this moment that we have never had in the history of this movement? That the United States Supreme Court were going to take and hear these two important, significant cases. And so we really saw it in three phases, if you will. It was they granted cert leading up to the day of, and then the day of and everything around it that happened outside that courtroom, and then from the next day all the way to the decision and beyond. And so what we ultimately agreed to was something called the Respect for Marriage Coalition, where all of these organizations working in coordination, in collaboration, in the same room. In the first floor of the Human Rights Campaign, all of those organizations were represented. And together we reached out and hired a public affairs firm, SKD Knickerbocker, to really give us the arms and legs and army, if you will, that we would need as this case was rising to the Supreme Court and all that would be happening around that. And it was made possible because of that coordination by many of you, including our host, the Gill Foundation, funded that coalition so that we could really have the conversation with the American people and to maximize the moment. We focused on things across the country like editorials, op-eds, events in states all across the country that served to elevate the conversation about marriage, showing loving and committed couples across this country in every media market in America, and show the harm that was caused by them by the denial of marriage equality. Secondly, we were able to elevate those around this country who lived in states that had marriage equality to show the harms of DOMA and to really elevate the conversation in a way that we've never had and move public opinion and continue that momentum that came out of the election. And a few examples of things that came out of that. Ken Melman, I saw, is here in the back of the room, and Ken was instrumental in putting together an incredible list of Republicans to sign a brief in support of the Perry case. And that's important, as we progressives would like to think that all 9 of those justices listen to everything we say. However, they tend to listen, particularly some of them, to other voices and diverse voices. And when that brief was put together and when it was launched, it was hard not to see a story about this regardless of where you were in the country. It was covered nationally, it was covered locally, it was covered in media markets around the country to increasingly show this is a bipartisan issue. The marriage discrimination in DOMA impacts everyone negatively, regardless if you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. And so that campaign continued with force and includes some advertising, which we'll show you 2 examples of that advertising. It's also important to say what it's not. This is not a coalition to try to influence the justices. That would be inappropriate and not something that we do. That's the very capable lawyers' jobs who walked into that courtroom about a week ago to make that case. Our job was to continue to move the country and create the climate and atmosphere to show that America is ready for marriage equality. And I think that was done with great vigor. On the day of was another opportunity. Now, we had to create a separate coalition because the organization specifically involved with the 2 cases, it wouldn't be appropriate if they were part of an effort outside the courtroom advocating. So we built a coalition that existed for those days around the actual oral arguments. It was 170 organizations, over 4 hours of speakers outside that courtroom, most of which were all carried live on television with American flags draping that stage. Once again, using minimal resources in order to maximize the earned media attention that was outside that courtroom so that we could continue this conversation with America and move public opinion along as we did so. And so I think there's a grand lesson here in terms of how we as a movement and how many of you as funders can really coordinate and collaborate and do it successfully with great results. And I think we are all very proud of our abilities to do that and to coordinate and collaborate. And I know many of you saw what happened around that case and outside the courtroom, both on the Perry Day as well as the DOMA Day. What you would have had a hard time finding are images and messages that came from our opposition. And that was because a lot of work from these organizations and the teams that were working around it to really amplify our voices and minimize or perhaps even diminish the voices of the Westboro Baptist Church and others who were outside that courtroom. So I just want to once again thank all of you for funding that effort that is ongoing and will go through the decision and the reactions around the decision. And I think one day very soon, perhaps in June, both Proposition 8 and DOMA will be gone, and the country will have moved at an incredible pace in the months at which those cases rose. So now we'll show the ads.
None of us would want to be told we can't marry the person we love. As Americans, we believe in freedom. That's what I fought for as a Marine, and that's what we believe in as Republicans. Freedom means freedom for everyone. I didn't used to understand the importance of same-sex marriage, but after learning my brother was gay, I wanted the same rights for him. He was the best man at my wedding, and I want to be the best man at his. It's only fair that Calvin should have the freedom to marry the person he loves, too.
It's time for marriage. A growing majority of Americans have come to believe it's time to allow marriage for gay and lesbian couples. Here's why.
Our daughter, Emma.
A gay couple in my ministry.
My sister-in-law.
My brother, Octavio.
A business partner.
Our moms.
My son.
My sister, Irene, a police officer.
My brother, Kian.
My neighbor.
Our godson. It's time to give gay and lesbian couples the freedom to marry.
It's time for marriage.
Thank you, Chad. So now I want to go a little more deeply into some of the things that people have talked about. And just since we just saw these ads, Amy, I want to turn to you for a second, because I think what all of the ads indicate is how good our research has been and how effective we have been in really reaching people. And what we saw in the referendum campaigns pretty much was that our opponents seem to have been asleep at the wheel over the last few years, and the ads we saw this year were very similar to the same ads that they used in 2008 and 2009. Now, I'm assuming they've woken up and that they're doing their research and that they're going to try and figure out how to be more effective. So what do we need to do to stay on top of this messaging and research piece?
A really excellent question, and it's a really important one. And it's true, this last election, people might remember we were very focused on kids in school and how do we turn back the negative attacks around that. And those were not breaking point messages this time. And it was partly because they didn't have the funding to deliver them at the level and volume that they needed to break through. It was partly because their ads just were less emotionally attuned compared to what they ran in 2008. So they weren't on their best game, and there's no reason to think that they might not be on a better game again. I think one of the things that is really powerful to see now is where they're going with religion. And it's the reason that we need to continue to develop our own religious messaging and be able to speak to so many of the people who identify in some way with Christianity or Christian values in a Christian context. When you speak to someone who self-identifies as Christian and you use secular arguments to try to tell them why they should make a decision based on secular values, but you ignore their religious values, it feels dismissive to them, like you're telling them that the way in which they make their moral decisions is irrelevant, and instead they should make their moral decisions based on your value set instead of theirs. So the silence, the absence of religious messaging can be very undermining and make us be very ineffective. It's one of the reasons you saw so much religious messaging, because we needed to connect with people where they are with their own value set and be persuasive in that context. The other side now on non-discrimination, on all kinds of things, birth control, they're moving very heavily into this weighing religious liberty, individual religious liberty against other kinds of liberty, our liberty and the right not to be discriminated against. So in terms of where we need to invest a lot, I think our next phase is really going to have, a research investment is going to have to be in understanding how do we have that religious conversation in a way that gets people to come out when they weigh things on our side instead of the others. And we don't yet know how to do that, although we have a lot of good guideposts to figure it out.
Thank you. Evan, I want to pick up on something that you talked about, because you talked about the interplay between the ground game and air cover. And I wonder if you can talk about that a little bit more, in particular, how you see us using those things, ground game, air cover, as we move forward in the work.
Yeah, I'm sure you've all heard the constant preaching of we need to have conversations, we need to talk with people. It's something that we have been saying to ourselves, to our teams, to our community, and to the broader community of non-gay as well as gay people who care about this. And it turns out it was true. It's the single most important engine there is. And the way you can make those conversations happen is in part by the encouragement and giving people the tools and giving people the inspiration and the comfort level to have those conversations. And it's also in part shaped by the context you can create that encourages people to have the conversations. And I thought some of the most interesting polling and analysis we did after the 4 ballot wins last year, amongst a variety of questions we asked people, and you may get the numbers exactly right, but the general point was we asked people, among other questions, where did you get most of your information about the freedom to marry and gay people and this debate and so on? And by far the largest answer was television. People had either seen ads or they'd seen the coverage and so on, and that's their primary source of engagement. But the next question was, and how did you make up your mind? What was most persuasive to you? And there, television was relatively low, and by far the #1 answer was conversations with someone I trust about gay people and about freedom to marry. So it's absolutely essential that we continue this extraordinary encouragement and support for and framing of people's having the kinds of conversations that President Obama role modeled so well when he talked to the country about how he had changed his mind. Or Senator Portman made it personal and talked about it. And it wasn't just that he knew someone who was gay. It wasn't just that he had a gay son. He talked about talking with his gay son and how that really caused him to reflect. That's the engine of change. That's what we've done so well, and it's what we need to continue doing. And it doesn't just happen just because you nag people to have a conversation. You have to help them have a conversation. And then you have to, it's sort of like we're all taught, you give people a topic sentence, and then you do your argument, and then you sum up what you just heard. Air cover, in the form of messengers and television and so on, in a way helps people process what they're hearing.
So, Chad, as you look to the future and look at us going forward, we've talked about, we've won marriage now through referendum campaigns, we've won it through legislative campaigns, we've won it through court cases. How do you see the strategies? How do you see the interplay of those strategies going forward?
Sure. Well, we have to continue to fight this battle on all fronts. In any war, if you let your guard down on any one front, you're going to lose. And we are finally at the point in this movement where we're able to be on the offensive on every single battlefront, whether it's in the courts, whether it's at state legislatures, whether it's moving efforts in Congress, although they're a bit slower than anyone else. So we've got to continue with great aggression, moving forward with I often say if patience is in fact a virtue, it's one I don't possess. And so on all of those fronts, we've got to be aggressive, and we've got to really move to this new place we are in the movement, where we write off no one, and we write off no region of the country. To me, one of the most interesting statistics that were in these slides in the presentation prior to this one was showing that, yes, we know how much marriage has moved nationally, we know how much marriage has moved on the coast, but it also showed a 10-point movement in the South on marriage, a 10-point movement in the South on marriage equality. And so we have frontiers now in this battle where that we're able to really open up new aggressive fronts on, which we really never had before. And You know, when we all walked into, those of us who were lucky enough to be in that courtroom, it's a bit like going you know, into a jail cell. You go through 2 levels of security. You go in, they take you into a locker room where they ask you to check everything you have except for your clothes. And the only thing they specifically mention, by the way, are your calculators. Does anyone carry a calculator anymore? But you had nothing. You had no phones. You were out of touch with the world. And then when we all walked outside that courtroom and heard the roar of support, but then turned on our cell phones and saw what was happening around the world and saw the sea of red that folks who had changed their Facebook profiles to a red HRC logo to show their support. Many of those, by the way, were straight allies. One of the most moving emails that I received that next day was from a soldier in Arkansas who had only come out of the closet a year prior. His family had rejected him. His mother told him, his Southern Baptist mother who lived in Texas told him that he was going to burn in hell. That wasn't followed by, at the time, that I still love you anyway. And he wrote a letter talking about, an email to me last week talking about the power of those cases and the fact that, that ownership was felt even to a soldier in Arkansas whose mother had rejected him when he came out of the closet, but also talked about how for the first time he knew that his mother accepted him and loved him, although still with some reservations on the religious front, when she changed her profile picture to that red equal sign. That was the first time he realized that his mom accepted him, and by the way, told his family, her family and friends that her son was gay. She had asked him to keep it secret from her family. That is one tiny little example of where we are in this movement, but I think it's indication of the new frontiers that we have to really move people on these issues if we do it right and if we seize the moment.
You've talked a lot, Amy, about the messages, and we've referred to it a little bit, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about the messengers. Yes. And how important the messengers are, whether there are messengers that are in our ads, but also Obama and other figures as messengers.
Absolutely. So one of the methodological challenges or problems that we saw in the way polling was used in 2008 and 2009 and before was that we were testing disembodied messages that were just words on the phone, and they weren't connected to a messenger. And so they failed to capture the full power that they could have either on our side or against us when they weren't delivered by a body, by a person. And so what we found in our research, we started showing, we would only do focus groups where we actually showed video, where we showed people saying things, because the words on the paper just weren't going to give us the insight that we needed. And so we learned a huge amount about the messenger qualities that made somebody powerful or that diminished their impact. And the messengers that did make it on television you saw are extremely authentic. You would never see any of those people and think, oh, that's an actor. They're just pretending. You just know that those are real people telling real stories, and that authenticity was one of the really important qualities that, that we found. So the messenger is really important, tied to the message, and it has to connect. It has to be authentic to who they are so that it resonates with people. And they have to be speaking to people in the values that those people share. The importance of meeting people where they are instead of where we are can't be overstated. And so that's part of the reason that the Christian messaging is so important. And I think it's something that can be hard for, well, let me just say, I've been doing a lot of interviews with gay donors, and it's been so interesting to see how many people tell me that they can come out of the closet as gay, but they can't come out of the closet in the gay community as Christian. And so that's something that I think was a movement we have to do more grappling with, because Christians are not the opposition. They're more and more with us, and we have so many powerful Christian allies and ways to engage. And we need to do a lot more work, especially as, again, we move forward on dealing with a lot of these religious exemption claims that are going to be coming up.
I want to sort of go up. We've been going a little deeper into some themes, but moving up for a minute, maybe you could talk, Evan, about why marriage has been such a powerful tool for changing people's hearts and minds about marriage and about gay people in general.
Yeah, well, in the paper that Chad talked about 30 years ago and ever since, the reason that I argued we need to fight for the freedom to marry was twofold, and I still believe this today. One is because marriage is extraordinarily important. It's a very meaningful passage of life for most people. It's the language in which we talk about love and commitment and dedication and family and connectedness, and these are very deep and powerful and important human aspirations for most people, most times, in most societies throughout most of history, and it's the gateway to a vast and unparalleled array of legal and economic protections and consequences that affect every area of life from birth to death with taxes in between. And therefore, to be denied the freedom to marry is to be denied something very, very important. And again, of course, as we all know, we're fighting for the freedom to marry. We're not talking about mandatory marriage. We're not saying marriage is the only thing that matters. But that's one reason why it's so important. But in that paper, and ever since, I also have believed that not only is all that true, but that the engagement around marriage would be an extraordinarily powerful engine of transforming people's understanding of who we are and our place in society, and would also invite them to turn from the question of how they feel about gay people to ultimately what kind of person are they? What are their values? It's a value language. And Amy has just described in so many ways, some technical, but some we've all experienced, how powerful an engine indeed it has been. And if I could, I just want to make one other point, because I don't want to forget this. Time magazine, in its cover story, declared that we've already won. And it would be nice to take a victory lap and retire and think that was true. But I think everyone in this room understands we haven't yet won. We haven't yet won the freedom to marry, let alone everything we all care about, for which this is also an engine. What is true, as was exposed in the courtroom and in so much of the national coverage over the last several months, is that our opponents have lost. They don't have a good argument. They took refuge in all kinds of procedural stuff and diversions, and repeatedly the justices would expose that. They don't have an argument. But the win only comes if we continue the work and bring it home. It's our job to do that. We so have that within our reach with all that it brings, but we must continue until we have truly won, and then there will be wins to build on that we will seek building on that win.
Thank you. It's always so inspiring to listen to all of you talk. You know, we've talked about stories and research and collaboration, and you mentioned in passing, Chad, that as part of the Respect for Marriage project around the Supreme Court cases that we hired SKD Knickerbocker. And how do you see the use of that kind of professional outfit? You know, what's the interplay, or how does that intersect with the kind of collaboration among organizations that we have and some of the grassroots work that's happening?
Well, by hiring an experienced public affairs firm in Washington, what that allowed us to do is have folks from each of our organizations who this is their area of expertise, whether it's politics or messaging or programming or events, but also to supplement that with dozens upon dozens of people. Some of you actually came to that war room, and if you walked in, you saw a sea of people seated next to one another around tables, working together, coordinated and collaborating. And much like a campaign where you need to staff up heavily for some period of time, that's what this was. And so even if we had all been able to dedicate our entire staffs to that effort, then it still wouldn't have been enough. And what that allowed us to do in coordination and collaboration was really bring in some expertise, folks who've done these kinds of campaigns before, folks who've worked around Supreme Court public affairs efforts before, and ensure that we had the best people when we were partnering on something that was a unique opportunity that we might never have again. So ensuring that we do it right. And just to take off of something that Evan was saying about our job is not yet done, and I think many of us saw that Time magazine cover and said the same thing. When I was growing up as a kid in the South, life happened in three places: homeschool and church. Today, it's still homeschool, church, and you add the internet, and which in many cases is the one safe haven for these young people. But even at the point at which we have marriage in all 50 of our states, our jobs are not done until that young person who's growing up like I once was in Arkansas, not knowing that I knew a single gay person. Now I know many of them were gay, but they didn't tell me at the time. But until that young person can grow up with the same hopes, dreams, and aspirations, and have non-discrimination laws, and have marriage equality, and be able to go to sleep at night knowing that they'll wake up the next day and being in accepting and loving environments as opposed to rejecting environments in those places. And I know that's what motivates all of us and motivates so many of you. And at a time like this, when momentum's on our side, we can't slow down, we have to double down. And I know that's what we're all committed to here.
I think my last question to, and maybe each of you if you have any thoughts, but what do you, is there anything that can stand in our way? What do we have to make sure doesn't happen, or what do we have to guard against so that we can get to where we want to be? So Evan, do you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I can truly say I believe we have this within our reach. I don't believe no matter what the Supreme Court does in June, we obviously all hope for the very best, and I really believe that even if it's not the very best, it's more likely to be good to great than to be bad. But no matter what the court does, as I said, having gotten interracial marriage wrong before we got it right, we have the momentum, we have the winning strategy, we have the truth. The only thing that I worry about, to the extent I'm worried about anything these days, it's that we read the Time magazine cover and the sentiment that it reflects and think it's done, or that it will waft in on its own inevitability, or that someone else will do it, or that people get bored with this and want to find something new. That Chad's point about doubling down is really, really right. At all the points of this, we've either been told it's impossible or it's inevitable. And the problem with either one, neither one of which is true, is it leaves out the part where we do it. Well, we're in the part where we need to do it. And the only thing I worry about is that we will not maintain the vigor and the force and the collaboration and the teamwork and the funding and the engagement that absolutely will deliver this. And it's something that's so important not only to us, but as President Obama put it so exaltingly in the inaugural address, this is a central part of the American project. This is something we together are doing for our country and for the world. And it's an engine, and we need to keep at it until we truly have won, and then there'll be the next thing to build on it.
I'm going to say organizational silos and tribalism, I think, are the two real dangers that we face. So one is that it was such hard work to bring the silos down, and we need to keep them down and keep that collaboration moving forward. It's really important. But the other is that human beings are wired in our brains to be tribal, to look at other and think it's hostile or dangerous, because that's how you evolved and survived. And we have all kinds of cues that tell us that somebody's other, and there's a lot of otherness around straight, to gay, around black to white, et cetera. The interconnectedness that people were talking about this morning in terms of the movements is very real, but hard to hold on to sometimes, and really important as we move forward. We need to keep doing work that diminishes the otherness and that communicates shared values and shared goals, and that breaks down some of the tribalism that generates hostility and a sense of, I'm not going to do that for you because you're not doing that for me. So I just think those both are really important as we move forward.
I think I will simply continue the theme of the danger is slowing down and letting our guard down on any one of these fronts, as opposed to doubling down on them. Because the moment we start to let our foot up off the pedal, our opposition starts to grow again. In many ways, the Catholic Church replaced the Mormon Church in funding of these last ballot measures. And all of our groups did great things. When that would happen in a particularly in one of those 4 states, we would release numbers showing if they gave $500,000, we showed how many food kitchens could have served, how many people a food kitchen could have served, and how many battered women's shelters could have been expanded in that particular town. And that had impact. And I think we've got to look for opportunities like that to continue to push our opposition back and make it painful for them to step up and put resources in against us. Because what they do and the messaging that they put out there, it not only makes it harder for us to win, obviously, it also is a message that a young kid is hearing, or that kid's parents are hearing. And so everything that we can do to continue our offensive, but also everything we can do to continue to bring down those who make it a profession to fight against us.
Thank you, Chad. So I want to just close with reminding us of how Evan started this by saying, we're right. Like, one of the reasons we're moving forward is because we're right. And I think you have really given us a lot of insight on the combination of really deeply understanding the conflicted voter, knowing how to tell stories, having real people tell their stories, having the combination of incredible collaboration and sharing, helped by using professional communication outfits and doing all of that intersection, really, I think, helps illustrate how we got from where we were to where we are, and hopefully to where we want to be. So I want to thank all of you who have made this work possible, and all of you, and thank you for the sharing. And if people want to continue the conversation, tomorrow morning at breakfast, there'll be a round table, and people can talk in more depth and get a chance to ask your questions of any of the people who are on the panel. So thank you, everyone.